My name is Robert Vaš, and I'm the founder and president of GlobeSec, which is one of the leading policy institutes coming from Europe, with offices across Europe: Bratislava, Prague, Kiev, Brussels, Washington. And I have a great pleasure to welcome all of you here, because we have a great panel with the topic Versus and Wars, Navigating Hybrid Theaters. And we have a very high-level panel here, and I'm glad that here among the speakers we have General Anil Chauhan, who is the Chief of Defense Staff of India, 4-star General. Welcome. General David Petraeus, former Director of CIA. He was the commander of ISAF. Today he is the partner of KKR Group and chairman of the Global Institute, KKR Global Institute. Vivek Lal, who is Chief Executive General Atomics Global Corporation. Pavlina Pavlova, Fellow New America. And Maggie Spencer, co-founder and general partner at Oder Capital. As I introduce the panel, I have to say that today's conflict is no longer confined to battlefields. It is unfolding across cyberspace, financial markets, information ecosystem, affecting our critical infrastructure, our democracies, basically our everyday life. Warfare has been always about the technological edge, but today it is also about the speed and who can adapt the fastest, integrate new technologies effectively, and anticipate evolving threats in the hybrid landscape. And with the technological advancement, we are talking about not only the technology itself, but speed. And we are talking about hyperwar, which reflects the unparalleled speed and concurrency of actions enabled by AI that is fundamentally transforming the military operations and strategies. And this shift represents a significant change in the nature of warfare. We at the GlobeSec, one of our research centers is called the Geotech Center that we founded last year in Prague, and that is led by General John Allen. We have a very high-level technology advisory group with Chris Miller, General Lavigne, Kersti Kaljulaid, the former Estonian president, and many other high-level people. And we are looking at how technology becomes the defining feature, not only of geopolitics, but also of conflict, and how it transforms the threats, and how they are transforming the national security. And the GlobeSec has been doing a lot of work on this topic. Our report on lessons learned from Ukraine looks on how Ukraine used digital and AI-driven capabilities, both on battlefield, but also in cyberspace, and what we can learn from it. We are also now looking at how Europe is integrating digital capabilities into national security structures and many, many other areas. So with that, let me turn to our speakers, and let me first go to General Chauhan. From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenge in the shifting global security environment, how the technology is changing the battlefield, and how is India adapting to meet these threats?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I think the global security environment is marked by two things. One is uncertainty and rapid amount of change. I joined the army about almost 43 years back. And the types of war they taught us about, the traditional wars, declared conflicts, they're no longer there. But yet conflicts exists. It's perennial and it is ubiquitous. We see it every day on our television screens. So this is where the global security environment is. And as far as India is concerned, I think the biggest challenge which I face is to to train people or to understand conventional war as well, along with this kind of hybrid kind of wars. That's one big challenge. The second big challenge which I foresee is training people for all these kind of conflicts and wars. Third thing which I feel is disinformation. For a country like us, which is a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic society, disinformation is, I think, or internal strife could be a major challenge. So that's a big challenge for us, and that's a beginning of what we can call is the battle of minds, actually, or the cognitive warfare. This, I think, is a major challenge. Last but not the least is the speed of technological advancement and absorbing those technologies into us, our system, and training people, retraining people. That, I think, is a major challenge.
Thank you. Can I just follow up with a question? Because also India has faced hybrid threats from both state and non-state actors. What lessons would you draw from your experience in countering asymmetric warfare?
See, look, India has been facing this asymmetric threat, or what you call as this kind of a threat. We have called it always subconventional kind of a conflict. We invented this particular term much before West invented terms like global war on terror or asymmetric warfare or fourth generation warfare or now hyper conflicts. So we have called it a conflict which is below the threshold of conventional kind of conflict. And as far as the lessons are concerned, I think the biggest lesson is that there is no substitute for boots on grounds. Technology can only be an enabler, but it cannot replace people. I think that's very important. Second important lesson is about shaping of the combat zone, actually. In conventional conflicts, you shape the battlefield with fire, actually. Over here, we are looking at shaping of the mindscape, not the landscape. So the battle of the minds becomes important as far as hybrid warfare is concerned. The third important lesson is about intelligence. That's intelligence is important, both human as well as technical intelligence. And we're not talking about the combat zone, but area around the combat zone also. This would be important. In such kind of an warfare, hybrid warfare, I think we should also look at close collaboration between the state government and the local police. So it's a kind of an whole of government approach which is able to look at such kind of an warfare. This, I think, would be major lessons what India has learned in its battle against, subconventional conflicts.
Thank you. Let me move to General Petraeus. Hybrid warfare is not a new phenomenon. It has evolved over decades, blending conventional force and unconventional tactics. And few people understand it better than General David Petraeus. So, given all your experience and what you've seen in Ukraine, for example, in the latest conflict, what lessons can we draw from this conflict for our own armed forces? Are we quick enough to adapt to the changing environment?
No, we're not. In fact, I was joking with the CEO of General Atomics earlier, whose firm did such a spectacular job during the surge in Iraq and the campaign in Afghanistan, both of which I was privileged to command, but in providing cutting-edge unmanned systems, the Predator, the Reaper, and so forth. But the only reason we transformed rapidly was because we were losing the war in Iraq. And you had a forceful Secretary of Defense, and we approached it in a way that I will then use to illustrate what we need to do in the future right now. But I want to just revisit where we were in 2006. I had just completed a 3-star tour in Iraq. I'd already done a 2-star tour. I knew I was going to go back as a 4-star. There's an acronym in the U.S. Army called DOTLM-PF. And if you follow that, it really helps you make institutional change. You have to have doctrine. We didn't even have a counterinsurgency field manual 3 years into those 2 wars. We wrote one faster than it's ever been done before in less than a year. So now you have the concepts, the doctrine, the intellectual foundation for the operations you're carrying out. You have to change the organizational structure, the O. You You have to change your training. We were still, believe it or not, training for conventional armored warfare at the National Training Center when we looked at that and overhauled all of that. Leader development. I was in charge of all of the commissioned, non-commissioned warrant officer training in the entire U.S. Army, all the 16 different schools and centers. We overhauled all of that, so we actually prepared our commissioned, non-commissioned warrant officer leaders for what it was they were actually going to do instead of what it was we were preparing to do during the Cold War. You have to do personnel. You need certain types of personnel that are different, and that's particularly true right now. There's materiel. So again, .lum, M, you have to overhaul. We didn't even have V-shaped hull wheeled vehicles yet, even though improvised explosive devices were blowing the bottoms out of the flat bottoms, and I've been asking for them. We actually bought them for the Iraqi security forces when I was a 3-star in Iraq before we bought them for the U.S. Army itself. And then finally, facilities that enable you to do all of this training and material and so forth. So if you follow that process, it's a pretty good approach. The problem is that right now in the U.S. military, we have the beginnings of these conceptions. In some cases, we have some quite extraordinary visions. I'll get to Hellscape, which is the vision of the Indo-Pacific commander for what he'd like to see the Taiwan Strait be turned into. But we haven't yet really solidified that. We haven't changed our structures enough. We haven't overhauled the training. Leader development, not yet sufficient, and all the rest of this, much less materiel. In fact, we have a legacy procurement system in the United States military. This is overly simplistic, but it essentially produces yesterday's technology for tomorrow's wars. It's such a sluggish, slow, litigious process. Global Atomics knows this. They'd love to see this sped up, but if we don't drive it from the Pentagon, and it's really the Pentagon and the Congress that has to do this, you can't have the agility that you need. Now, fast forward to Ukraine. I've been there 5 times just since 2022 alone, just there 3 or 4 weeks ago. Every time the progress is incredible. Of course, they're fighting for their survival. This is their war of independence, and they are acting like it. So they have a procurement system that is actually producing tomorrow's technology for today's wars. You go to visit the unmanned system, you know, they're one of the first countries that has not only an Army, Navy, Air Force, it has an unmanned systems force. And it's not just aerial systems, which are incredible. They produced 1.5 million unmanned aerial systems last year alone. Their design, their manufacture, and their employment of all different types, everything from thousands of suicide drones that they throw at the Russians on the front lines every day to out and back, get 12, 15 missions before they get shot down, the longer range ones going after the Russian refineries and energy storage locations and so forth. But how does a country which has no navy, as we would know it, ships at sea, how does it sink 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet? With aerial drones that it designed, manufactured, and employs to find the ships, and their maritime drones that actually sink them. The last trip I was there 4 weeks ago, Brave One put together this incredible exposition of hundreds of unmanned systems companies, startups, and all the rest of that. And there are even more than that in Ukraine. And it's not just limited, again, to air or maritime. There's also ground systems now. There are remotely controlled vehicles. Much of their logistics back and forth to the front lines is actually remotely controlled because those locations, this frontline area is so lethal on either side. By the way, aircraft there's no close air support as we would have understood it in the past. The close air support is the unmanned systems that they're throwing at each other. And again, a very, very lethal space with electronic warfare, kinetic air defense, and ballistic missile defense, and so forth as well. And we need to learn much more rapidly from that if we're to deter, because of course what we want to do is ensure that a potential adversary recognizes that we have the means and also the willingness to use those means in certain conditions. And that's what we want to do. So now if we look at, for example, the idea of Hellscape, this is all out there. There was an interview with the Indo-Pacific commander not long after he took command. He was previously the Pacific Fleet Commander, so he knows that area well, which laid out in his terms, he wanted to turn the Taiwan Strait into a hellscape. Incomparable numbers of unmanned systems under the sea, on the sea, in the air, on the ground, and increasingly not remotely piloted, but actually algorithmically piloted. And AI constantly helping them learn and update and all the rest of that, and AI helping to develop the algorithm and actually instructs the machine on what to do. The problem is that we haven't yet done all the doctrine, organizational change, overhaul of training, leader development, et cetera, to enable that, much less actually accelerated the material acquisition process to be remotely like what it is that the Ukrainians are doing, who are on the bleeding edge of this kind of technology, who are iterating on a weekly basis, not just software, which is relatively easy, but with hardware in response to what the Russians are doing to try to blow them out of the sky, jam their link to GPS or to command and control, and so on. So that's what we need to do. We need to have a much greater pace than that. And if I could use the Doge, you know, these are the efficiency experts under Elon Musk, I would focus them first and foremost on the procurement system in which the military-industrial congressional complex, every element has vested interests in the legacy systems, legacy processes, legacy basing arrangements, legacy maintenance contracts, and sweep all that away and take huge lessons from what's going on in Ukraine, where they have responded in a way that is just unequaled anywhere else in the world.
General, let me pose a follow-up question, because you have opened several very important points. But one of them is the speed of innovation. And I've been to Ukraine several times, and the level of innovation and creativity is immense. And you can really see that if a country is under pressure, you can innovate much faster. and
we did when we were losing the Iraq War. I mean, that's
exactly.
why all of a sudden I could finally get stuff that I've been crying out for years as a 2-star, 3-star, with a very aggressive Secretary of Defense, a supportive Congress, John McCain, and a president whose legacy rested on Iraq.
But what I see is that the small and medium-sized companies, not the big international primes, are faster in innovation and in adapting. So what we need to change
a prime example.
What we need to change.
Well, I think the companies themselves have to change their approach. So if you look at Anduril's approach, they build software first and then the hardware. They use existing components and structures and materials and all the rest of that. They actually build manufacturing facilities before they have the contract for the actual manufacturing. It's a really radically different way of doing this, as opposed to competing for years for a contract. Then they down select. Now 2 are going against each other, then they pick the one, they get the contract, then they build the manufacturing facility, and so forth and so on. So we've got to go much more rapidly. Again, the key is the partnership between those who design, those who manufacture, and those who employ. And that is not that close always in the US military, and I'd argue most militaries around the world. In Ukraine, they're all sitting in the same room, and they're not arguing over a change to a contract or something like that. We're getting better at software changes, but hardware changes are really, really hard with our contracting processes. So we have far and away, we have a defense budget that's not just bigger than all of our 31 or whatever allies, NATO allies put together, it's 2-point-something times that, but we still are not out on the bleeding edge the way the Ukrainians are. And of course, that's just one component of potential future wars, although we're seeing a lot of that in Ukraine, although I would just end by saying, what you have in Ukraine is the ultimate hybrid warfare. You actually have World War I trenches and minefields and no man's lands and heavy artillery and all the rest of that. You have hardware that's largely familiar to those of us who were in the front lines of the Cold War, which thankfully never turned hot. And then you have this over top of all of it and in and among all of it, again, this very, very cutting edge unmanned capabilities that we very much need to learn from. And by the way, when the guns do fall silent there, the manufacturing colossus in the defense space in Europe is going to be Ukraine.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, and thank you for all those points. I'm sure we'll come back to some of them.
And I've been sanctioned by Putin, if I didn't mention that, by the way.
You're doing a good job.
Yes.
Yeah.
Since he beat me out for Time Person of the Year in 2007.
Let me come back to India and to Vivek Lal. Launched by President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, the United States and India started an initiative on critical and emerging technology back in 2022. As a part of this initiative, General Atomics initiated projects in India in defense and aerospace technologies, including drones, radars, and related systems. How does this cooperation help India to tackle the hybrid threats, and what do you foresee what kind of challenges in integrating these technologies into existing defense infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. So just piggyback on General Chauhan's excellent comments, as well as what General Petraeus just said, and having talked with former prime ministers I see in the audience, Abbott and Bill, I think speed is, of course, the essence of any endeavor these days, and whether in the defense security space or the energy security space. And as I hear the conversations at Raisina, I can't help but distill down to 6 areas that I think need absolute immediate attention from like-minded nations. And the first would be persistent surveillance. Persistent surveillance deters conflict, it deters wars, and we don't do enough. We need to do more of that individually and collectively. The second aspect that has been brought out by some, we need robust data sharing. Robust data sharing, not just by partners and allies, but robust sharing even within one's organizations, like General Petraeus just mentioned. The third piece, and General Chauhan alluded to this, which is very critical, is the human resource factor, and the fact that training and cooperation in training, especially in special forces training, I think is very critical. Another point is electromagnetic spectrum dominance. I think that is very critical moving forward. You can collect all sorts of data, but if you do not put it in an order where you can actually see a real-time operational picture and therefore be able to respond, the data will just remain data. Finally, the ability to deliver mass in numbers. We've seen that in the recent conflicts. Ability to have loitering munitions in the numbers required. And kind of a wrapper over all this is logistical dominance. That is going to be critical in moving forward. And certainly the US-India relationship is, I think, very robust. There's been a lot of great strides made. Indian industry is world-class, I think, with not only the large, medium, small, but also the startup community. And we've had great success working together with Indian industry.
Congratulations! Congratulations on the good job that you've been doing. Let me turn to Maggie Spencer. Maggie, do you want to react?
No, I just
okay. Yeah, you didn't hear me. I was congratulating you on a great job you have done here. Yeah. So let me turn to Maggie Spranger. Maggie, you have deep experience in investing in emerging technologies that shape global security. In today's hybrid threats landscape, where adversaries leverage AI, automation, and cyber tools, how has the changing relationship between government and private sector affected modern national security and defense strategy?
I think that's one of the most significant inflection points and questions in terms of strategic affairs since the Cold War to frame. As militaries around the world are grappling with rapid technological change, we're finding ourselves in a moment where the very foundations of not just deterrence, but sovereignty are being rewritten. To be very clear, the state's monopoly on strategic capabilities has fractured. To your point, General, the capabilities that are being produced in Ukraine right now are tethered to a nation state, but for $10,000 and a chip on the shoulder, I think we're going to see these fall into the hands of non-state actors in a way that totally shifts the legacy power structures. The character of competition has changed. Today's threats are persistent, they're multi-domain, and they operate below traditional thresholds of armed conflict. Hal Brands actually writes beautifully about this. He talks about deterrence in hybrid warfare facing the fundamental challenge of credibility when dealing with deliberately ambiguous and deniable actions. Traditional deterrence theory just assumes that we have attribution and proportional response capabilities. So how do we frame how we think about responding to, preventing, providing that incentive to not attack? Our adversaries are exploiting the seams between military and civilian domains, between government agencies, between sovereign states and the private sector. Traditional defense structures, to your point, General, are hierarchical, they're centralized, they're very process heavy, and they're very slow. We measure in the United States our procurement cycles in years, if not decades, whereas technology is iterating in months or weeks. This is a gap that is widening and needs to go in the other direction. Effective deterrence now requires establishing and communicating new thresholds that make it clear to our adversaries the consequence of participating in this gray zone aggression. Without this clarity, we're going to remain vulnerable to precisely the ambiguous actions that our adversaries prefer. This demands a significant mental model shift. The question isn't whether states should reclaim exclusive control over strategic capabilities. That ship has sailed. It's how governments should structure their relationship with the private sector to maintain effective sovereignty in this new paradigm. I'll frame it with three realities of our current environment. The first is that technological innovation now predominantly does occur in the private sector. AI, quantum, drones, it's private companies that are making these developments and capabilities. The second is that critical digital infrastructure is now largely privately owned and operated. We're seeing in the Ukrainian war in real time the effect of Elon Musk's decisioning around whether Starlink is turned on or off. This is fascinating from a power perspective and terrifying from the reality of how to engage with war. Finally, the information flows now transcend traditional boundaries. Digital platforms can amplify or negate military effects. They shape public perceptions, and they mobilize populations, all outside of traditional government control. These realities require a hybrid. The approach demands a sophisticated understanding of the adversarial decision calculus and value systems, which is not always easy when we don't know who we're fighting, but knowing not just the capabilities, but what they value.
I think you have also a book coming out soon. Do you wanna say a few words about it?
It's called Innovation Empires, and it explores exactly what we're talking about today, the historical relationships. We use analogies of history to talk about what's happening today, but what's happening today is happening so much faster and so much more impactfully than it has historically. So it's looking at the ways that power is shifting from sovereigns to private markets to potentially individuals.
Can I make a small comment?
Please.
Yeah, basically it's about partnerships, which Vivek was talking about. I think partnerships is all about give and take. As far as India is concerned, we have a large ecosystem for research and development, the largest academia, the largest number of STEM graduates, and maybe a very big startup ecosystem in India. And this can be actually used by West, US or Europe actually, to be used. So it's a two-way traffic in which, say, the Americans have started with that Index X kind of a program, in which Indian academia will look at problems which the Americans are facing, or problems with our military are facing can be looked at by the Americans. So that, I think, is a very good model. As far as technologies are concerned, means India needs more technologies at a faster rate. Now, we cannot allow a technological gap between us and another adversary. So hence, we know that where we stand. And some of these technologies, whether they are present, like he spoke about technologies which are for ISR, whether it's for communications, and for emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum, etc. There's a lot actually which countries can do. And over here, I think the geographies are favorable to us. In the sense, when you look at cyber or space technologies, geography is irrelevant actually. In fact, if you're at the other side of the world and you're of a different time zone, it helps because while one part is sleeping, the other part is awake and looking at those kind of threats. And similarly for space technologies, in fact, distance actually helps actually in space technology. So we are natural partners and there is a huge base. And what Jan Petrios spoke about, he spoke about the problems in legacy system continuing and this procurement systems being slow. Means it absolutely resonates with what's happening in India. Similarly, we have problems like our procurement procedures are so slow that it's difficult to imbibe technology at a rate which the armed forces would want.
Yeah, very good comment. Let me bring in Pavlina here because I think she brings another angle, vital angle into the conversation as she looks at hybrid warfare and how it is impacting different parts of society. Some of your latest research focused on, for example, the gendered impacts of data weaponization. So how does hybrid warfare uniquely affect different layers of society, and what measures can be implemented to ensure inclusive resilience and the whole of the society resilience against hybrid threats?
Thank you, Robert. Yes, so in my research, I focus on cyber operations and how to build resilience. And what I do is to look into the impacts. And we know shockingly little about the impacts of cyber operations. And this is becoming a huge and problematic gap for policymaking, for national security, for resilience strategies, because attacks against, for example, critical infrastructure, and we are speaking about healthcare, we are speaking about energy facilities, water facilities, and humanitarian NGOs, civil society organizations, giving some vital functions to the society. We know very little. What does it mean? What does it mean when healthcare infrastructure, when a hospital needs to stop operating or is disturbed by a ransomware attack? We know how to measure the leaked data. We know how to measure the financial impact. Do we know how the nurses were impacted? Do we know which diagnoses were most impacted? Do we understand what populations are more reliant on the care? So there is some, for that part of critical infrastructure, there is some existing research into crisis and how to build resilience in a crisis, but we still don't know how to effectively adapt it for cyber resilience. And we're still very much lacking the whole awareness about the cycle of these threats and the impact. So this is what my research and work tries to build in this space. And one thing that I looked into with my New America Fellowship was gender. So the factor that you are a woman, or the factor that you have different gender identity, or the factor that you are a man, like how it differently impacts you when your healthcare data is being hacked and leaked. What is the perceived security impact, and what's the real safety and security impact for populations? And why is it becoming increasingly important for cyber policy is that while we see complete negligence oftentimes in the critical infrastructure operations and how they protect the data, and especially like medical data, which are very interesting for cyber criminals to target, at the same time, we see those ransomware attacks especially becoming way more vicious. So we see not only the financial part, which we are used to. So I target you as a hospital because you have this data and I'm going to seek ransom for you and the financial impact. But because these proxies and cyber criminals operate from certain sanctuary countries, they're also in line with their foreign policy. And if they attack the adversarial countries and hospitals in those countries, they will be purposefully leaking those data, and they will be purposefully inflicting harm on the populations just because they can, and just because they try how it impacts the resilience of the country. And it's something like a death by 1,000 cuts. So you go through, you have every single year, you have increasing impact of ransomware attacks, increasing impact of data, and yet because it's happening in kind of distributed way, it's not yet acknowledged as a huge impact for national security and national security positioning.
Thank you. I think all of you have spoken about the fact that today's security is really interconnected. And it's not about only traditional warfare. It's about cyber, about hybrid, about information warfare. And that leads to what I said at the beginning, is the hyper war, which combines the new technologies, the exponential development of new technologies, and at the speed that has been unprecedented, and that brings the technologies that we are using already in our civil life to the battlefield. So that changes completely the nature of the conflict. So with that said, all of you, I think, agree with one thing, is that technologies are critical, and to keep the technological supremacy in the battlefield is absolutely crucial. And here, private sector is the one who drives the change, who drives the innovation, and I think it's absolutely essential that governments and private entities work even closer than ever before, because private sector is a critical, absolutely critical part of our defense, more than ever before. And that's why I think we were used to say that states have hard power, they have soft power, but I think right now they have also what is called the technological power. And that needs to be part of every future thinking of our security and defense. You want to react? And then I would like to open for questions. So if you have questions, just catch my eye. Yeah.
Look, I think we've always had all of these elements have been part of this. I can assure you again that when I was privileged to command 2 different wars, that I wasn't just thinking about security. Security is the foundation. Without it, you can't do anything else. As was famously said in Vietnam by one of the iconic figures of that war, security may be 10% of the problem or 90% of the problem, whatever it is, it's the first 10% or the first 90%. But then you solidify security by what you do in all the other realms. And it includes all of it. I had actually 2 advertising agencies working for me. One is actually sort of a political campaign organization. The other was more of a media monitoring. And that was before you had the explosion of social media and all of the other new digital tools that are out there. We had all the economic tools. We rebuilt the entire oil infrastructure of Iraq. I monitored how many barrels were produced and how many were exported. We got all the electrical grid going again, the towers back up. We monitored the megawatts put on the grid. All of this has always been part of this. The difference is the speed, as you note. And again, that speed is about to take another step change because of artificial intelligence and what that enables you to do. And you're going to increasingly be having artificial intelligence enabled unmanned systems fighting other artificial intelligence, and not just, again, in the physical space, but also in cyberspace, the informational space, again, economics, diplomacy, and all the rest of that. And the question is, how do you organize all of that? How do you oversee the execution of all of that if you don't dramatically accelerate the processes that we have? You can't have a National Security Council meeting frequently enough to pull all of that together. You can do it, and again, in a situation where you have an Ambassador Crocker and perhaps a General Petraeus or whatever, but you have to then delegate enormously to them and give them the tools that can enable them to match the pace that is now. And so again, I think hyperpower, hyper warfare, whatever the term, captures that particular acceleration. And again, I don't think we've necessarily caught up with it with processes, and that's the key.
Because what all of you said as well is, I think one key word is the speed. That is the differentiating factor. But
you have
with
to
the
get the concepts
exponential
right.
speed, and
Yep.
the governments are really lacking behind in embracing that innovation into our systems. And the gap is widening. And we have, I think, a problem in the West as such, in our democracies. Until we implement those changes, that gap is widening, and that creates a strategic vulnerability if we don't close it quickly. So if you can, if you had a quick comment.
Yeah,
you
look,
can,
it starts with concepts. It's not, doesn't start with the technology. It starts with the concepts for employing all this, making all of it work together, and then producing the institutional change using that particular checklist that I think is about as good as any other out there. But it starts with big ideas. A strategic leader's got to get the big ideas right, communicate them effectively, oversee their implementation, and determine how you need to refine the big ideas to do it again and again and again. And the context in which this is playing out is that the speed of technology, all the other elements of a particular conflict, now all of which, again, are moving much more rapidly than in the past.
Yeah. Do you want to react on this conversation on technology, Maggie, and then General?
Yeah, maybe
or
I know.
General, please.
You use the words terminology of hyper warfare.
Yeah.
I have alternate terminology for this. I've been using this term known as convergence. Convergence. Convergence is trying to converge your first revolution in military affairs, that was maneuver, along with net-centric, which is second revolution in military affairs, with now what is becoming as more intelligent warfare. It's kind of converging tactical, operational, and strategic part into one. It's kind of converging maritime domain awareness, air domain awareness, underwater domain awareness. It's converging all multi-domain operations as one which the lady mentioned. You know, not only the three domains, but also cyber and space. But ultimately, all of this, what General Petraeus said, is going to lead to a very intelligent warfare in which you're going to take decisions faster and faster. I think that is going to become very, very important in future. And for this, I think when the war was just physical, I think physical geography was important. Then war became hybrid terrorism, then human geography became important. But today, I think cognitive geography of societies is becoming equally important, where you have to find out as to where do the societies get their information from? What influences them? How do they take decisions? After all democratic governments like ours are hosted to public opinion. If public opinion can be changed, you can change government decisions very fast without resorting to violence. That's how warfare is changing tomorrow.
Yeah, you're right. Maggie, do you wanted to react?
I was going to say, you've nailed it. We're facing collectively borderless problems, and so we must have borderless solutions, and that's going to demand different types of partnership structures that are going to involve some sort of formal institution. But of course, we all know that the work gets done in the quiet rooms away from the crowds, and so there has to be that trusted network for exchange, not just of ideas, but of technology and know-how. And General Petraeus, to your point, I think what you're raising is really the big question, which is, can democracies, especially when they aren't yet under direct threat as Ukraine is, can we outperform an authoritarian industrial policy?
Vivek, do you wanna answer that question, whether we can outperform?
Yeah, in terms of challenges, and that's a very good point, to incorporate advanced technology into existing defense infrastructure, the challenges are multifold: technically, operationally, financially, and indeed, there's always some resistance to change, and that's a cultural issue. And so, as General Chauhan just very accurately enabled this discussion, is how do you keep pace, incorporate all the latest technologies, but it has to all come into the existing infrastructure that has been built, and then making that really efficient.
You know, you also have to have a different mindset. So again, I finally, in my frustration with the procurement system and then the testing system and everything else, I finally went to Secretary Gates and I said, look, if you have something that you're testing, why don't you put it in the hands of our soldiers out here and let us test it, as long as if it doesn't work well, it's not going to kill somebody. And then let the soldiers figure it out. And if they like it, we'll buy more. If they don't like it, we'll park it in the back of the combat outpost and let it rust. But again, you have to have this kind of approach to life, and that's very different from the normal peacetime situation, unfortunately.
And this is what happens in Ukraine. You have an innovation, and it
Absolutely.
constantly goes to the battlefield, and that keeps this pace at a very high speed.
Yes, but then you have to have a system that actually ensures that just not this unit is learning it, that all the units are learning it. So you have to have a lessons learned. In fact, I was concerned not just that everyone in Iraq or Afghanistan would learn it. We need the rest of the big military back in the U.S. to do it. So on my battle rhythm, there was 1 hour a month where I would get with the guy that was my successor in this job that I had as a 3-star, and would walk down, here are the doctrinal changes, all the way down that list, so that they can incorporate it into the overall system and drive change institutionally, not just out in select units or that particular battlefield.
Mm. You wanted to react, Pavlina?
Yes, just very quick 2 points, and especially on cyber resilience. And I think there is a lot of lessons learned from Ukraine. Ukraine prepared very well for the cyber warfare, and there were attempts, especially early on, with very sophisticated malware to put the systems down, which did not succeed as it was envisioned. And why Ukraine prepared so well was also that over the years they built resilience with their not only international tech companies but also the national private sector, and with national NGOs and SATA. And you have to build that, my second point, you have to build the resilience, especially in cyber, across society. Because what we see when someone is targeting, for example, important governmental data, which will be used in military strategies, is that because you cannot enter through, for example, law enforcement or ministries and setup points, you'll go through think tanks, you'll go through civil society organizations who work with these organizations, you'll go through so that's one entry point, how to get the data. So we have to secure also these usually cyber poor organizations across societies and across the ecosystems. And secondly, we see a lot of attacks as the war drags on, which are disturbing critical infrastructure. These are low sophisticated attacks like DDoS attacks, but they decrease the resilience of the population and they tire the population. So we have to increase that preparedness across our populations, because the quotation I really like for protecting critical infrastructure is like, we live in glass houses and people are about to start throwing rocks, and we have to prepare for that.
Thank you. And I've seen Shub already signaling me that we are getting to the end. So I really, really would like to give at least a few questions to the audience. So let us, just very short questions. Let us take 2 from here and 1 from the other side. Yeah?
Namaste all. My question is to General Anil Chauhan, sir. Sir, this side, sir, towards the left. So apart from wars, when we speak about enhancing resilience amongst India, as an NCC cadet myself, I see National Cadet Corps as one of the important institutions. So how do you see NCC's future from now? Jain, sir.
So let me also take 1 question from the back and then 1 question from the right.
Thank you so much. I'm Murat, political scientist from Azerbaijan. So my question is about the implications of the changes of warfare, which we're talking about, for global governance. Like we see that the intensity and of war and the vehemence of it have greatly increased. I mean, not only in Ukraine, we can see it from Gaza, from Sudan, Yemen, many other places. So what do you think it means for the global governance? And what can the major states do to alleviate the impact of human life in general? Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning and Jai Hind to the panel. My question is to General Chauhan, sir. So you have been very vocal about AI, quantum, data, and valor needs to be integrated with the technology. In terms of 2025 being the year of defense reforms, and in terms of hybrid warfare, how are armed forces advancing on network-centric to data-centric warfare, UAS doctrinal classification, which you've mentioned a lot in the past, and AI-driven decision-making for upcoming Joint Theater Command, specifically as India is taking a bottoms-up approach and consensus approach for theater commands. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Yeah, all good questions. So let us, and we have, we have only less than 1 minute, Shub, so I think we can have a little bit more. So let me very quickly start by you, General. And
That's
then,
first to that lady who's been associated with the NCC. The wars are not fought by armed forces alone. Nations fight wars. And NCC actually prepares a national base amongst the people of the country, populace of the country, to train them during war and crisis. So I think NCC will always find a place in our national security architecture. And that's why NCC, as an organization, is placed under the Ministry of Defense. There was a second question over here, which a gentleman wanted to know. How are we transiting from net-centric to data-centric? Yeah, data-centric kind of warfare. Thank you. In fact, during the Aero India, I think Honorable Raksha Mantri had released a particular document, which was an unclassified version of multi-domain operations in net-centric warfare. That particular document lays down a roadmap to graduate towards data-centric kind of capabilities, which compasses not one, but many kind of fields together. And basically, essentially, this is what we feel, or I feel, where warfare is progressing towards. And we want to be in line with the advanced militaries when this particular revolution in military affair comes about.
Thank you. Vivek, do you want to pick up on some of the questions now? Maggie?
Very briefly, to your point in the back, we're moving from a world that had a military alliance that I think will be upended. And it's been the defining mindset and really the dictum for how we had structured international relationships. And I think those power structures are going to change tremendously. And maybe it's not a bad thing where world order or rules are moving away from the nations that have held the largest militaries toward ones that are perhaps more innovative.
Thank you. General or Pavlina, do you want to pick up on some of the questions?
I may just add on the alliances.
Just very shortly.
Very shortly. Very shortly. Working a lot at the UN processes, they are very important for, but at the same time, they are very limited because you need to build consensus to achieve any kind of meaningful framework. So those frameworks which we have are obviously not enough to keep us away from attacks, from cyber attacks and hybrid warfare. What is very important and why the coalitions is that accountability, especially in cyberspace, is built through coalitions of willing countries. And we are about to witness shifts in those coalitions, which were driving the little accountability that there is. So that's something which is deeply worrying, and I wish to end up on a more positive note. Maybe you will, Robert. But it's something how, we take cyber away from kind of separated from geopolitics, but it all translates. So what we are seeing in foreign relations, what we are seeing in coalitions among the countries, we'll even more see in the cyber warfare. And I wish the coalitions of the willing countries driving accountability and rules-based order were getting stronger and not weaker.
General, last words.
Well, I just think we need to recognize the new realities, the new dynamics, new technologies much more clearly than we do, and then transform our forces and processes much, much more rapidly than we have been in the past.
So with that said, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. I think we would need more time. If I have two outcomes out of this conversation, that one would be that the private sector plays a tremendously important role in the defense and security of our countries. And I think there need to be at the table, not as a transactional relationship, but as a partnership relationship for the future. And second takeaway is the speed. The speed is of essence, and we have to do much more to be able to embrace all of those changes that the new technology brings to us. Otherwise, non-state actors and some state actors will be faster and will be able to diminish our own security.